Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another session of the Global Foresight Summit. This year is organized by the APF World Future Review and Fast Forward. We have for this first session of the afternoon in Europe, Joshua Polchar from the OECD. He's the Head of Foresight. We have also Piret Tönurist from the OECD. She's the Head of Innovation. So we are really happy to have you here on board with us.
Super, thank you so much, Miguel, and welcome everyone to this session, Act Before You're Ready, from the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. Here's our team. We're joined here with our team leader, Piret Tönurist, who is our Anticipatory Innovation Governance Supremo, and myself, I'm the Strategic Foresight Lead at the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. We have a two-part presentation for you, and we'll have some time at the end as well to read your comments and try and do a short Q&A session. I'll start by talking a bit about our approach to strategic foresight, how it might be a little bit different to what others are practicing, and what our ambitions and our main impacts are. And then Piret will talk a bit about some of the work that we have underway and how we're really helping governments to achieve their ambitions in anticipatory innovation. So this is me. So I'm leading on strategic foresight work. Before we start with the professional work of OPSI, here's a bit of context from a personal view, and this was the story that inspired me for the title of this session, which is that I'm in the process of buying a house, and it's probably one of the most uncertain and confusing and turbulent future-oriented activities that I've personally embarked upon in recent years. And there were so many questions ranging from how the particular real estate market worked that I was looking to enter, but also more contextual factors like global macroeconomic trends, which could have an impact on my investment and my ability to make a return and to afford what I was embarking on. And I realized in this process that there was so much uncertainty and so much that I didn't know, that if I waited until I had all of that information, I would inevitably have waited too long, and I would probably never act at all. So this process of buying a house connected somehow to the work that we do in strategic foresight, where we're also saying that knowledge of the future is always incomplete. In fact, the only evidence we ever have is of the past, but we all have to act in the present at some point, and so do governments. And usually that will happen at a time before we feel entirely ready. So acting before you're ready is something that we all need to do and realize that it's more or less inevitable. So now on to the work that we do at OPSI, the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. We're all about helping governments to innovate and to implement knowledge of the future that they're generating. And we've realized that all the governments we work with have what we call an impact gap. What is this impact gap? Governments know what the benefits can and should be of engaging in futures thinking, anticipation, strategic foresight. They quote them to us all the time. They want to be stress testing their plans. They want to have early warnings of disruption and evolution in the contextual environment in which they're operating. They want to identify new solutions that they wouldn't have otherwise picked up on. And they want to establish common purpose so that they can all be pulling in the same direction and overcome these infamous silo effects that a lot of organizations suffer from. And there's really no shortage of high quality strategic foresight work out there. And here are just a few examples of some of the excellent reports that we've come across. And some of them have been remarkably prescient in picking up on things like rising populism, a pandemic that brings global trade and travel to a virtual standstill, oil price shocks, waves of migration into Europe. All of these things were envisaged well ahead of the time at which they actually occurred. But many organizations felt that they hadn't taken adequate steps to prepare for such disruptions. And this is really what we call the impact gap. Governments have at their disposal many different ways to act through policies, strategies, regulations, partnerships, and so on and so forth. But aligning these actions with the knowledge generated through anticipation exercises doesn't always happen as effectively or as smoothly as they would like it to. So our response to this challenge is both a conceptual one and a practical one. And the conceptual part of it is reframing the future as something that's not out there in the distance, but something that really matters right now. So often we see the future represented as a physically separate location, either on a diagram or on a map or something like that, from the present. We have ourselves here and we have the futures out there somewhere, somewhere else, someone else. And the difficulty is that when the future is presented so separately from ourselves in the present, we tend to think of it as someone else's problem. And that someone else, by the way, can even be our future selves. There is now psychological study evidence to suggest that the further ahead we think about our own selves in the future, the more alienated we become from our future selves and the consequences of our actions today. But we know that humans don't only think in the short term about their present gratification. We are capable of taking care of our future selves. And there are many different ways that we do this every single day. We get vaccinated, which is not a particularly pleasant experience in the moment that it's happening, but we know that it's something that will benefit our future selves. We might do physical activity that, again, we don't particularly enjoy in the present, but we know it's doing something good for our future selves. And the same, if you brushed your teeth this morning, you're thinking about the future. That's an act of anticipation. So we're all doing these personal innovations, if you like, and bringing the future into the present. And all of us have done something today for our future selves. I just gave 3 examples, but we'll open up the comments and invite everyone participating today to, while the presentation is continuing, write a couple of words in the comments about something you did today for your future self. So the idea here of talking about bringing the future into the present is to say, well, actually, the only real future, the one that really matters, the one that counts, is the one that we have here in the present. All of our ideas, all of our expectations, all of our hopes, fears, and dreams, they're all something that we can access in the present. And more importantly, they're things that we can take action on in the present. So indeed, strategic foresight is this discipline of exploring, understanding, and identifying action to take in the present, responding to the future as it emerges in real time. So I tend to present the future not so much as a physically separate thing on on a cone or any other kind of map, but as something which we are co-creating through dialogue, through political activity, through organizational convention in the present. So these are all of our different ways of thinking about the future, of engaging with the future, forecasting, speculating, scanning, expecting, hoping, modeling, planning, and so on. There are many, many more as well. And the main thing to remember is that these are all psychological processes of the future which are happening in the present. This is anticipation. This is the sum of all of our future knowledge. So just like I will never fully be ready to buy a house, but I'm going to do it anyway, you will never be fully ready for the future, but you're going to go there anyway. And the same goes for governments. Governments will also never be ready for the future, but they will find themselves there at some point. So might as well act now to get ready. And this is what anticipatory innovation is all about. It's about saying we've got the future ahead of time, where we're kind of looking ahead and forecasting, and even through scenarios, it can be a bit sort of future ahead of time, and we're bringing it towards ourselves and doing future in real time to move from a kind of reactive stance of wait and see what the future brings to we're going to shape the future now in the present. So we've talked about what we are personally doing for ourselves in the future. Now let's turn the conversation to governments. What are governments unready for? And you can sense where this is going, because later we're also going to be talking about how governments can act on things that they're unready for. So turning back over to the comments, inviting all of you participants watching to think about what are governments unready for in the coming few years? What's emerging on the horizon that you feel that governments are not adequately prepared for? And while you're doing that, I'll talk about how we move into action, which is first through a caveat, which is that governments face a strategic problem in the sense that they have to be many things to many people. Governments have multiple missions, which is quite a challenge, and something that a lot of other organizations don't face quite so strongly. Here are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and there are so many of them, and advancing on all of them is nearly, at an equal speed at least, is nearly impossible. And there may be even trade-offs and contradictions between them. And that can be quite a challenging and even paralyzing thing for governments to deal with. Governments are also particularly affected by a whole range of different volatilities and uncertainties, complexities and novelties in their contextual environment that makes this strategizing process even more difficult. So it's no surprise that governments do struggle with strategic capabilities and moving from futures and anticipation into action. Scenario planning can indeed help with these challenges, and we do some of this at OPSI in the OECD. We help governments to use alternative fictional future worlds created for the purposes of reframing and learning. But we always keep in mind that futures methodologies like this, like scenario planning, megatrends analysis, visioning, and so on, are only part of the picture, because you anticipate today, but you also act today. So we define strategic foresight as this ability to constantly be perceiving, making sense of, and acting upon futures in the present. And the way you do that is through an awareness of what's emerging around you, what could be some of those disruptions and future challenges, a knowledge of your values and why it matters, problem-solving skills and an ability to identify what you can do differently. And this is really a kind of strategic capacity in governments. But what we also notice is that organizations tend to struggle with this what we can do differently what we can do and the instrumental capacity. And when we're supporting governments in taking action to overcome the impact gap in anticipation and action, we like to focus in on their kind of strategic inventory. What are the things that they are capable of changing? And these can be things like laws, budgets, partnerships, incentives, research, talent management, and so on. And the different tools at the disposal of a different agency will be different every time. But a good starting point is to look at what those tools in fact are, and then to look at what different actions can be taken with them. Can something additionally be funded? Can something be defunded? What negotiations can be engaged in? What new regulations can be added? What former regulations can be scrapped? Evaluations, partnerships, recruiting experts, and so on. And we really try to formulate these tools and actions into an idea, which we call a prototype, whereby you would use a particular tool to engage in a particular action using specific resources and then add a timeline to it. So we're really moving from this anticipation and understanding and exploring of the future to engaging in action on it. And this is an oversimplified version of a prototype template that we would use in an anticipatory innovation discussion with an organization, using a particular tool, engaging in a particular action, identifying resources, apportioning responsibilities, and achieving it by a particular timeline. So anticipatory innovation is one of the four major facets of public sector innovation, and we really do see them as facets in OPSI. We also work in areas of mission-oriented innovation, enhancement-oriented innovation, and adaptive innovation. And all these different forms of innovation have varying degrees of whether they're top-down or bottom-up directed, and how they engage with different levels of certainty and uncertainty. And we really see this suite of facets of public sector innovation as complementary and mutually supporting. So the anticipatory part of public sector innovation is really a unique part of the innovation portfolio. We talk a lot about portfolios of public sector innovation. And it's really this additional capacity to be innovating in the present based on knowledge of the future. So this is the framework of our process in general, and I think I've summarized it so far in the presentation, but this is in one slide: exploring, mapping, analyzing, testing, and learning. We also have looked at the different institutional circumstances which can either favor or indeed hinder the effective implementation of strategic foresight and anticipatory innovation within governments. They fall into two broad categories of authorizing environment and agency. And we have a briefing and a fuller report about how these different system mechanisms play a role and come together to create a set of circumstances where anticipatory innovation can thrive within the public sector. So with that, I'll now hand over to Piret Tönurist to talk a bit about our current work, putting these ideas into action. So Piret, over to you.
Thank you so much, Josh. So I really want to tell you a little bit about the actual work that we do on the ground, because the previous has been a kind of the core theoretical foundations about what we do, but the the kind of the real world, of course, is messier, and actually making those things happen in organizations and in larger government systems is quite difficult. And that's why at the Observatory, for the last 3 years, we have been building up quite a large program and portfolio of different demonstration cases of where, together with countries, we're actually building up those capacities, those tools and methods on how to actually do anticipation in practice. So in the kind of the real world where politics come into play, where public interest comes into play, where we have to actually contend with how the organizations, performance evaluation systems, budgets are run every day in governments today. So going forward, our portfolio in the slides consists of very different projects. We actually work together with more than 12, 13 countries at the moment, but these are our biggest projects and processes that were going on. So together with the Finnish government, we are actually building out the whole anticipatory innovation governance model with the help of the European Commission. So we have been working there from September last year, and we have actually looked at the overall system from an anticipatory innovation perspective and used our own framework to actually do the analysis about how anticipation is happening and what is hindering those processes. And from the summer onward, we're actually going to select 3 to 4 core areas that we have also identified for cross-government challenges, but also kind of anticipatory innovation mechanisms that we want to experiment on how to actually build them inside the government in the context of Finland. So we'll have the assessment report out in early September for the initial analysis of the system, and more to come in 2022 when our experiments are actually running through. And in Latvia, we are actually testing anticipatory innovation governance mechanisms together with the industry partners in its entirety. So I'm jumping over a little bit. We can also go to Slovenia backward if I'm not respecting the slides. But in Latvia, indeed, we are working together with the... so now we're in Slovenia. So in Latvia, we're working together with the Investment and Development Agency of Latvia, and we're actually building out technology ecosystems in an anticipatory format. So how government can also work on this kind of transforming new developing technology areas together with developing partnerships across the private sector and beyond. So actually, how do we form these ecosystems where the government can actually learn from an anticipatory perspective, but also test out and co-develop innovations together with partners beyond its own control? So what does it actually take? And what does it actually take to get the private sector partners to come behind the table and invest their time? So actually making that case or building that purpose and making that process valuable for them is also something that we are working on. And now if we jump backward to Slovenia, then Slovenia is somewhere together with the Slovenian government for the EU presidency. We're actually doing great work that Josh is also leading on the future of the public sector itself. So not only talking about what kind of changes the public sector has to contend with, but what does the future for the public sector itself look like? So we've been building using traditional strategic foresight tools to build different scenarios about most probable or preferable or even more radical changes in the public sector. But we're taking a step further from that, and we're actually using those scenarios and finding out what the barriers of use of scenarios are in government in an innovation design process. So we're actually in the process of what Josh was describing, of actually making those prototypes happen in practice. So selecting going from initial very safe ideas to more radical ideas that we might want to test and experiment on, so we actually can learn about what type of future we want to see. So for the future also, not to say that these scenarios are forever, but to another scenario process, another innovation process, and so forward, kind of a continuous and dynamic process, and how to run that in practice. And if we jump over Latvia, then we'll end up somewhere. Where do we end up, Josh? And overall, we end up actually have run through several kind of these projects. And I think one of the major projects that we have upcoming in terms of anticipatory innovation capacity, and I think that it's a lot to learn from futures literacy as well, is that in Ireland, we're going to start a huge process from September onward to actually build a full curricula for the whole of government at different levels about what leadership needs to know, what the different practitioners need to know, about this anticipatory innovation process and how strategic foresight in practice fits into that. But if you want to lead more, then we have policy papers and also working papers and the kind of the core principles about what anticipatory innovation governance looks like. And I think we can continue onward for hours and hours to talk about this, but it's maybe now time to also look a little bit to the future, to also mention the upcoming conference in 18th to 19th of October in Slovenia, where we're actually going to look at the future of the public sector and anticipation itself. But maybe we'll have time for one question from the audience. Josh, over to you.
Thank you so much, Piret. Yes, I think we have time for a couple of questions, so I can put a couple to you and then maybe you can put a couple to me. So we have one specifically addressed to you, Piret, which is how do you help governments to implement change based on anticipatory plans and scenarios that they develop? And talking a bit about moving from insights to action there.
Mm-hmm. So that's an excellent question, and also something that we have really seen that we need additional tools for, because and as part of the team we have at the OECD is very innovation background and very different backgrounds, and Josh comes from a strategic foresight background. So we're actually developing tools and working on the ground, supporting governments in that process. So for example, in Slovenia, we are actually facilitating those innovation processes. We're co-creating and helping to facilitate the creation of the scenarios, but also we're facilitating throughout the process of the innovation process itself. So the government puts together very diverse teams to tackle these scenarios and innovations, and we are actually testing out different tools and methods on them to actually get to the workable experiments and innovations that would tell us the most about the future. And I see a question there also from Antonio, who was asking about the OECD tools and methods and if they're open source and for external use. I think we have everything in Creative Commons, but it's a good point to maybe also for Josh to tell a little bit about the collaboration with Portugal and upcoming tools that we have in our midst in this space.
Yeah, definitely. We have a collaboration on the Anticipatory Innovation Starter Kit, which our colleagues at LabX in Portugal are developing. And the audience for that will be people who are relatively new to anticipatory innovation and strategic foresight, and also like us, looking to bridge that impact gap from anticipation into action. So we'll be thinking about the different pathways that they follow in that journey from anticipation into innovation. We should add that this stuff is really hard and that every government we're working with finds this difficult. We're putting in place and developing as we go the different methods for turning anticipation into innovation and then into action. And it's quite normal, and we're quite used now to the feeling of discomfort when ideas aren't quite flowing as quickly as we'd like them to, and we are stepping outside the comfort zone of what we're used to doing as people who work in the public sector. And so we're able to reassure our collaborators that that's difficult work. So the Anticipatory Innovation Starter Kit is currently in a kind of alpha/beta development stage, and we will be publishing along with our colleagues further information about that in the coming weeks and months.
Definitely.
Do you want to add anything more on that one, Piret?
No, I think if anybody's interested in the Anticipatory Innovation Starter Kit or wants to be one of the testing grounds that we will test it out with, then do let us know and get in touch and tell you that you're interested in. I think there's also a question from the audience about, do we work in East Africa and what is our kind of portfolio globally. So I think overall at the OECD, we work with different countries, and currently on our mission space, we're actually developing a partnership that is covering all sorts of transitions, also beyond the OECD traditional countries. So in the innovation space, we work together with partners we have the most to learn from, and not always they are part of the OECD countries themselves. And we have had the pleasure to also advance those topics a little bit with the African Union and especially our South African colleagues as well.
Yeah, I mean, the OECD is a member-led organization. We have 38 member countries, and those are of course listed. So it's inevitable that our work will to some extent reflect that membership. That said, there is futures thinking and emerging futures literacy all over the world, and of course we stay abreast of those developments as much as we can. Piret mentioned she's worked with the African Union. I've worked with the Southern African Development Community in various capacities, and do have foresight practitioners and futures thinkers in my network from that part of the world, as I do from people all over the world, and I'm sure the same applies to all of my colleagues in the observatory. We also have a question, Piret, here about whether we're talking only about sovereign governments or other entities acting in some capacity as governments. And the person asking the question referred to corporations, which I guess we can talk about a bit, but we also have extensive work with supranational and subnational entities, right?
Exactly. And we also have partnerships with particular futures communities, research centers on these topics as well, that we have developed partnerships to actually go beyond research in these topics as well. So they don't have to always be national governments, and they also are not always national governments. We also work together with cities, municipalities, but also specific agencies and different research institutes. I think
Great.
there's also, yeah, thank you.
No, go ahead if...
Yeah, I maybe pose a question for you as well. It's connected to my favorite topic, which is resilience. Antonio is also asking, given the need to build societal resilience, which countries are the most using these methods to build resilience, and how does it actually fit in with anticipation?
So the actual intersection between resilience and strategic foresight is not something that I've looked at in great detail as it occurs in national governments, but I can say a bit about what's going on in the OECD with respect to that, because we also have a team of colleagues who are specifically looking at the discipline of resilience. They also have foresight expertise within that team, and they are publishing material within what was formerly known as the New Approaches to Economic Challenges program, and is now called the WISE unit. I'm afraid I don't know what that acronym stands for, but it's all part of the collective intelligence that the OECD is building and is able to offer governments in that respect. All right, do we have any other questions from the audience? Seeing that we have about 3 minutes left on our slot.
Mm-hmm. I think we have covered them all. Maybe also to point out which countries are most using these methods at the moment. Mm-hmm. I think specifically in terms of resilience, our Dutch colleagues and the Netherlands as kind of at the forefront in terms of sustainability and futures. But we work together, as I mentioned as well, with Finland, which has a very long tradition of strategic foresight, but Ireland, Portugal, Slovenia, but we also work together in terms of exchanging experiences with Singapore, and also look forward to potentially working together with Korea and others. So there's a lot of widespread countries that are actually interested in this work and are actually developing the streams.
Indeed, yes. And someone has very kindly mentioned that the WISE unit is the center on well-being, inclusion, sustainability, and equal opportunity. And I should apologize because this is a capacity that the OECD has built over many years. The name is new, but the expertise is well entrenched, and it's just the change of name that I missed. We have maybe one more question talking about backcasting and how it fits into our approach. Do you want to say a couple of words on that, Piret, or shall I take that one?
Maybe I'll get started and you can take it to a kind of more honest end. I think backcasting is in different circumstances can be quite useful. So if you have already a kind of a creative process and you have reached a kind of a preferable future or something, a state or something that you want to actually innovate on, and then to use backcasting in that process to reach for a kind of an innovation journey or a testing journey that we can use in practice, it can be quite valuable. But I think it should be used in context with other methods of how we do anticipation. And to be honest, there are hundreds and hundreds of different methods for different occasions in the strategic foresight space. And I think Josh has quite a lot to say about that as well.
Oh, well, absolutely. And I would have quite a lot to say about it were it not for the fact that we have less than a minute left. Only to say that we're used to combining multiple foresight methods in any intervention. We're not particularly wedded to any particular method. We would always choose a combination that is most suitable according to the context, what's going to bring us back to the impact and to the action and acting before you're ready in our work. So with that, I think it's time to hand back to Miguel. Thank you so much to our hosts for this opportunity to share our work, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with our participants. I think you're talking to us on mute, Miguel.
Sorry, it's like the third time that happens to me this morning. I was saying that thank you so much, Piret and Josh, for being here. It's really great to have you involved in the summit this year. So yeah, looking forward to see you again in the future.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you everyone for watching. We are back in 4 minutes with the next session from Tanya Sindler. So yeah, see you in a bit. Don't forget to refresh your web browser. Bye.